All right, open your Bibles and we are going to look at Lamentation chapter what? Who? 5. Did 4 last week. Well, I had notes for it. We're close to it. Anyone else think we're on 4? We'll finish up on 4. Bob's going to be doing an introduction or chapter 1 of the book of Ezekiel. A very difficult book and even harder chapters. But we will be looking at that. But tonight we're going to do 5, so turn to 5. Don't forget our graduates. We've got a bunch of them graduating. The wedding shower table for Matt and for Shauna is at the back. Please do not forget them. We are so close to 20,000 on our missions. We lack about, I think it's about $170. And $170 will make 20,000. All right, work this out. We have raised $19,830.40. Do what?
$19,830 plus 70 makes 20,000. No, it's 100. Oh, 800, 900.
Let me write this down.
No wonder she has all the money and you don't have any there.
And so, now you notice I didn't argue. Yes. And so if someone will help donate $70 plus 100, we'll meet it. And one of the sad things, I don't know if you keep up with the work in Uganda, but they just, the first thing that Don and I both say when floods come through California and it pulls down a mountain and the dirt and it knocks the house, why do you build back there? And you think that about Uganda, but they don't own the land. They can't just move. But they had they have a lot of floods. And of course their homes are nothing more than just shacks, and their church buildings about the same. And then there was a lady, they had the picture of the lady who was killed. And then I got a friend that goes to South America and gives kids the toys. And in my self-righteous dreams, I'm thinking, you going and giving out toys when we got people starving to death? But it's both important. It's just a different work. What would be more important to you? Your kid getting food or your kid getting a plastic Barbie? Food. And that's how you prioritize. How I prioritize anyway. What is the most important? All right, VBS meeting, May the 15th, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Graduates have the table out there. There's a cookbook that is available. Where did you go on your honeymoon? Where? Eureka Springs. For how long? Overnight. Where? Morro Bay. Okay. Little fishing town in California. How long? 3 days. Okay. Springdale. And the car broke down, so you said this is far enough.
Everybody was chasing us, and I lost them.
All right. Where'd you go on your honeymoon? Stopped at Fort Smith on the way home. Okay. All right. Who else? Where? Hot Springs.
Went to a movie, a horror movie.
It was the last day of rain that year. It rained on our wedding, and it was the last day, and there was a drought after that.
Man.
Be good though.
That's a sign.
How about you, Mike?
I graduated on Friday night. Put everything that I owned in a 68 Chevrolet Caprice Classic. Drove from Nashville down to Gaston and got married Saturday. Donna had to be back at work Monday. So we stopped at this flea-bitten old motel in Birmingham, Alabama. The water didn't run right and the toilet leaked, and we had enough money, was it Saturday night, to buy one hamburger. And so we split it. And Donna was making good money. She just wouldn't give it to me. Got up in the morning, Sunday morning, went to church where Dale and Jeff's daddy was preaching at that time. And I went to introduce Donna, and I said, "This is my wife, Donna." I'd never called her Raine. And so I hit a brick wall. And they're thinking, yeah, sure. And Donna finally introduced herself, and then we drove probably about 70 more miles down Tuscaloosa, and Donna had to go back to work. There was a couple that sent out a wedding invitation, and the cost to go to their wedding was $1,500 per couple. Would you go to a wedding like that? No. And so they canceled the wedding. You got students that will take a semester's tuition and take their girlfriends, wives to Europe. They just miss a semester of school. And man, when I hear things, that was so foreign to me. I mean, I got up, went to school, was there by 8 o'clock, and usually didn't get home till about 7. I was in school all the time. Our children were the same way. No summers off. The book of Lamentations, chapter 5. We've entitled this one, The Suffering of the Siege. The children of Israel, they had watched their prophets being taken away. They had watched the walls fall. They had watched the temple fall. And they were a people in bondage. And if you'll notice there, and it seems to be a common thought and a common thread that goes all the way through the book of Lamentation. In chapter 5 is probably the summation of the lamenting or the weeping. But there in verse 16, the crown has fallen from our head. Woe to us, for we have sinned. They know what they'd done wrong. They knew why they were being punished. And so here is the last poem, the lament of God's children. Imagine preaching or being Jeremiah and having to say these things, to address an audience and say what he says. He was honest and he was forthright. He looked at God and he talked directly to God and said, I want you to listen. And God listened.
He had to say those things without a solution, too.
Yes.
He wasn't saying, turn and things will be better. He's just saying, this is what we've done. This is what we've suffered because of what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
God will, God is still there, but they had no end in sight. There was no promise of an end in sight. There was no person being raised up to save them.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, they were just in it. And that's, they're just in it. They were, and the suffering wasn't, as I read, the suffering wasn't just the suffering. It was just you're buying back your own stuff
Mm-hmm.
that's stolen from you. You're having to redeem things that, wood and water and just things that keep you alive.
Mm-hmm.
That were yours to begin with. They were taken. And now just to rub salt in the wounds, now you have to buy them back.
Okay.
It was just no end and no salvation in sight.
All right, if you're in Uganda, and it doesn't seem like they do TV, they do cell phones. And they're looking and let's just say they're watching something about America and they see our homes and our automobiles, closets filled with clothes. what are they thinking? Because this Jochan, and Jochan is Mabusa's brother who got run over by a car, broke both of his legs. Makes a very humble living with growing what we would call potatoes, sometimes coffee and bananas. And then he cannot move, he cannot walk. Who feeds his family? See, we had a Scottish missionary come through and his wife and spent the night with us last night. And I've known Graham for a long time, but still I kind of shake my head and because I don't understand half what he says. The way those Scottish people talk. But he went through almost a year. He had a growth, and he had to lose 100 pounds. They went in and they did the work, and they stitched the stomach here and so on and so forth. And I asked him, I said, if you were just a regular worker under the Scottish government and you had to be off work for 6 months, are you compensated? And he said, if it wasn't for the church support that I raised, he said, we'd have nothing. We buy it, and Donna has bought long-term medical insurance and help for her mother and for us. Right? Long-term disability? You don't? Oh, goodness, I gotta stay healthy. I can't afford to get sick. And so there's always someone there to help. You know, if you're in a poor congregation, you may get help, but it'll be different. These people in the Canaan land, the land of promise, some think that they may have hidden some supplies, and it was at the danger of night, they called it the desert sword, that they would go out and kind of hunt for what they had hidden and killed if they were found. It could have been that they traded for food and it was dangerous. And so Jochan will let me know. And he's not being rude, he's not taking anything for granted. But he'll let me know the food that you bought me is gone. And $100 usually does a couple of weeks. And whereas these people, you know, at one time he was working. He didn't have to worry about basic provisions, as Mary Sue said. I mean, the water. These people had to buy their own water, even though they were living in the land of hope, the land of promise. Their food, basic food, firewood. And so he starts off with this, and he talks about Judah, and they were very penitent. Mark, you were going to say something? Mm-hmm.
Can't you see where your people and healers
Mm-hmm.
it's been long enough, in our opinion.
Yeah. You know, an eye for an eye, and it seemed like the Lord just kept taking eyes. Their complaint was, Lord, the punishment that you are giving to us has exceeded your mercy and grace. As like John said, they didn't know when it was going to end, even though the Lord said it'll end, and Jeremiah gives them hope. They just didn't know. And so you have this penitent plea from God's children. remember, O Lord. And usually when you find the word remember in the construction of a sentence like this, it is remember and restore. Well, we want you to remember. We want you to restore what we had. What has befallen us? Look and see our disgrace. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our homes to foreigners. They knew that God had brought this about. And sometimes we realize, I've done things and I need to repent of it. But restore, in many cases you lose. People have changed their lives, repented, and God has forgiven them, put them back in that grace. But there's still a period of the consequences. And that's what God does not remove.
So were they under Egyptian and Assyrian?
That was part of it. Babylonian. Even though at this time the actual dominance of their enemy had ended, they were still suffering under sub-governors, princes, and others that kind of taken over. The Persians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Egyptians. But also here, there were times that before the siege where these people would actually help them. But they looked at them. They looked at that crown that had fallen off, and they were a very envied people. And so he goes on there and he said, our homes to foreigners. And he's simply talking there about, like I said, those that were under a king. The king would leave, the siege would leave, but they would still have dominance there. We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows. He's talking, and the writer here, speaking for the people, a man normally does not say, I'm an orphan. That's the talk of children. And yet they believe that they have been orphaned or widowed by God. So we are orphans. We are fatherless. When he talks about language like this, what comes to your mind when you think about orphans and widows in the Scriptures? No one to take care of them. What else? In the state of Arkansas, if you are widowed or orphaned or you have children, we've got social programs that help. And I do believe, and this is just my opinion of James, that the orphans that the church took care of was just that, church, orphans, and widows. And if each congregation would do that, you wouldn't have widows and orphans. The church would be taking care of them. And so the writer here says we feel like that we have been left by God. We must pay for water we drink. Two things in this last generation we've seen. When we talk to God, we need to say, Lord, next time you create us, we need 4 hands. 2 for doing our work, 1 to hold a cell phone, and 1 to hold our water bottles and our jugs, gallons They have a gallon jug that you see people carrying around. The Stanley is a 40 ounce. How come we just didn't dehydrate when we didn't do that? I never ever thought people would be buying water to drink. Did you? As kids, we drank out of puddles, a garden hose. Even in Florida, everyone down there that's out of the city limits has a well. They just dig down till they hit the aquifer, and sometimes it's just as pure as it can be. Other times it has a little bit of iron in it, and you have to put the softener system in your house. But it was nothing unusual for me to be out working in the yard in Florida. Just take a hose, turn it on, and a little bit of iron ain't going to hurt anybody. You pay for iron tablets. I got it free out of my water. Water. They're in the land of promise, the land of Canaan, the land of hope, and they are buying their own water. How much is water? By the way, there used to be a fellow down here on Martin Luther King used to sell a bottle of cold water. He'd pull it out of his cooler and sell it to you for how much? $1. How much do those cost at Sam's and still do? 25 cents. So he still made 3 times what he paid. And so here was a people who was saying, Lord, this is why we feel the way that we do. We're going to pay for the water we drink, and the wood that we get must be purchased, bought. Our pursuers are at our neck. What they were doing is they were doing the work of animals. Some of your Bibles will go on and talk about a yoke. And you think about mules, draft horses. And he's saying that we have to take on the work. Our pursuers, if they catch us, they'll behead us. They'll take our head off. Our pursuers are at our necks. We are weary. We are given no rest. The land of promise, a land of rest, and they cannot find rest. Why? Do what? They have sinned, and they're answering the consequences. I believe that a lot of the drugs that we take are to settle the conscience, trying to give us rest. And there are some situations, even within the church, that will wear you out. Home life, marriage, just trying to live day by day. And so he said, here we live in the land of rest and peace, and we have no rest. We have given the hand to Egypt and to Assyria to get bread enough. You remember when they come out of exile, what was their complaint? Do what? The Old Testament calls it hoary frost. It was the very best bread that could be had. God cooked it. God made it. God delivered it. And here he is saying that we have joined hands with our enemies just to get bread. What would you do to feed your family? That missionary that I was talking to, he said that he had 5 jobs. He had a passion to preach. And because it could not pay him, he worked at other jobs. And as he moved on up a little bit and got a little bit of support, he would drop a job just to keep his family going. And so he says, we've given our hands to our enemies just so that we can have bread enough. How many of you were raised around an old cook stove, the old wood cook stove in the kitchen? A lot of time you had the wood floor. And sometimes on the stove that you heated the water for the washing, that big pot of water was so heavy that the top of the old cast iron oven would bow down like that. I would visit Brother Roy Montgomery, or at that time Roy Montgomery, and they had an old Southern Comfort stove in the kitchen. And it was one of those Alabama houses. You could look and you could see the floor and you could see the dirt under the house. But every time you would go, no matter what time of day, guess what was in the warming oven on the old cook stove? There was always biscuits, always bread. And any time that you would visit, and these days used to be here. If you go in, you had to sit down and you had to eat whether you were hungry or not. And these people here had joined hands simply to get, and we're talking about the essentials here. The essentials of life: bread, wood, water. And they had joined their hands with their enemies. Our fathers sinned, and here's a good one, and are no more, and we bear their iniquity. What are you talking about when you talk about God said that you do not bear the iniquity of, or the punishment of the sin of your parents? And notice who's saying this. But also you find in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 9 through 10, Exodus 25 and 6, that there are things that a prior generation has done that we will pay the price. Let me show you something about the history of elders in the church. Do you remember the picture, I think it was Tiananmen Square, where that young man walked up in front of a tank and just stood there? They were rebelling against, they were standing for something. And then the next generation became very authoritarian. We're talking about society and we're talking about the church. And then the next generation got so tired of this authority figures that anything and everything was just fine. And in all of this, each generation the church has suffered. I think that the church and this nation is going to suffer in the next generation. And so here he is saying that we're suffering. We're suffering the iniquity. The word iniquity there is the word filthiness, rebellion against God. And our fathers are not even here, and yet we still are suffering. We bear their iniquities. Is this not true of poor parenting? Poor parenting hurts the next generation. And I tell younger folks, listen, if you're afraid to say no, You come talk to me. My kids are gone. I collect no's every day because I can't do it anymore. I got a bunch of them. There are no boundaries. And God's children here are saying that we are paying. We realize that we have sinned. We're not doing away with our responsibility, but we're also paying for the iniquity, the rebellion of our parents. Slaves rule over us. And that's possible that maybe some of the exiles that remained there kind of moved up through the stations until they were honored slaves. They may have earned a position where they are now ruling over God's children. There is none to deliver us from their hand. We get our bread at the peril of our lives because of the sword of the wilderness. And this again goes back, and it could be, John, that they had hidden their food and would kind of sneak out and get, kind of like a squirrel. How many of you believe that squirrels remember where they buried their nuts? I'll give you an assignment, even though we're almost through. And you can tell Bob we got up to squirrels and their nuts and holes, and go home and study that. I don't want to insult anybody, but it's kind of one of those things. They just bury so many nuts, they just start digging until they find them. But anyway, so he says that in order to get bread, it cost us our life because of the sword of the wilderness. Our skin is hot as an oven with the burning heat of famine. It used to be in the South that people wanted that lily white, soft skin. And when you see someone who was dark, he was from outside. He was working the fields. And he said, we've gone from that lily white until now our skin is as hot as the oven. We're dark. Women are raped in Zion or Jerusalem. Young women in the town of Judah. We'll stop here. Why do they keep mentioning the rape of women in the book of Lamentations? Women, young women. Young woman is a reference to a virgin. Why?
The
The
man can't protect them.
what?
The man can't protect them.
It's absolute humiliation. Your men cannot even protect their wives and their daughters. And this was their way of humiliating the children of Judah, Zion, Jerusalem. And you say your women are raped in Zion. All right. If the children are born, the bloodline continues. And that would be true of godly. It would also be true of the ungodly. And that's why, people ask, why did God kill the women and children? You have a group of religious people that planned 9/11 for 7 years. That was just the bombing of the Twin Towers. That was not the rest of it. They trained at Zephyr, Florida, Zephyr Hill, right below where we used to live. I've told you before, we can't even wait for microwave popcorn. Whereas these people they have a strategy not for this generation, but for the next and the next and the next. And you're seeing it in countries. When they rise up, they stop countries. And what we are seeing is on college campuses, they stop things. And so there was the killing of women and children so that God's children's enemies would not be there anymore. All right. And be careful of the intermarriage. The intermarriage was not just for foreign women or men. It was for foreign ungodly. And if you want to look at a good one, who would you go to? Who broke that command? Solomon, who took God's money, God's blessing, and he spent it on the false gods of his wives. Any questions? John, I was going to change my oil tonight, but I think I'm going to wait. All right, appreciate your attention. And I may just give Bob my notes and let him continue in this, whatever he decides to do. Mike was chomping at the teeth that he... Every time I ride my motor scooter, this happens. Very good. Okay. Sure will. No.
I knew you were smarter than that.
Well, that's
Well,
not
I
because
didn't know that, but I was hoping.
there's some stuff in the back that I thought,